All right, good morning. Thank you for joining our webinar on everything you need to know about ADFS. We went back and forth about the title of this webinar. We wanted to focus on some of the things that you probably don't know. So it was going to be some of the pitfalls of ADFS, some of the things we've experienced in doing the dozens of ADFS implementations we've done so far, and we wanted to share some of that experience with you. A lot of what we couldn't have planned for until we saw it because we didn't know about it. A lot of different variations in how clients are set up and things like that. So the title, Everything You Need to Know About Implementing ADFS, is probably not everything, but it's a lot. So we're hoping you'll enjoy it today. Today's webinar is actually going to be presented by Desi House, who's a senior technical engineer at Nogalis, and she's been doing a lot of this ADFS work the past several months for a lot of customers, and she's basically seen, I don't want to say every possible scenario, but a lot of them. Just before we get started, just wanted to kind of, for those of you who don't know who Nogalis is, shame on you. We're an Infor partner. We're headquartered here in Newport Beach, California, but we're all over the U.S. These days, we do a lot of managed service work for Lawson customers. So we're basically do all of the support and maintenance and service for the Lawson application for 16 Lawson customers. And half of those guys are in the cloud and half of them are on-prem. So it's 8 and 8 right now. We've got several Infor-focused products that we've introduced over the years. A lot of our customer base uses them, and we're more than happy to kind of share those with you. You can find out all that you need to about Nogalis at nogalis.com. And if you're considering migrating to the cloud, we'd like to talk to you. So let's see. With that, I'm going to leave it to Desi to walk you through what it takes to do everything with ADFS, or everything you need to know about ADFS. Desi?
Hello, everyone. This presentation, we're going to talk about just some things that we have learned, as Tan said, about ADFS implementations. We'll cover some of the definitions, some of the keywords that you might see whenever you're talking to your implementation partner about ADFS, and what you can do before the implementation actually begins to set yourself up for success. And then specifications for the ADFS server, as well as your application servers and the SQL Server databases that you'll need. We'll talk about compatibility of all your applications, including your SSO Infor applications, which are the like LBI and the things that connect through to Lawson through DSP. We'll talk about what's going to need to change if you have any IPA processes that use nodes that connect to Lawson. And then there's a couple of gotchas. If you have an external web server, it's a little more effort involved to get that set up. So we'll talk about that. There are some changes to user identities in Lawson security and also in landmark security, and also some updates to the user identities. So we'll discuss that, and then just some general tips and troubleshooting for after you're implemented. So Active Directory Federation Services is a Windows tool that's provided on Windows Server that allows third-party applications to authenticate directly against Active Directory. So it's really a good and secure way to provide authentication for your third-party web applications. Infor Federation Services, or IFS, you're going to hear that a lot during your implementation, and that's Infor's sort of middle manager of Active Directory users who are allowed to authenticate against ADFS. So you have to add all of your Active Directory users who are allowed to access Lawson, but that doesn't actually give them Lawson access. It just allows them to authenticate against AD. So that brings me to my next point. It's important to know the difference between authentication and authorization. So Active Directory Federation Services is just used for authentication, and so is ISS. It's just saying, yes, this user is allowed to log in to this system. But you're still going to have to maintain all of your security in Lawson Security and Landmark Security or Infor Security Services, ISS, for authorization. So what applications you actually have access to will still remain the same. And then in Active Directory Federation Services, whenever you configure ADFS, you're going to add relying party trust for each website that is accessing Active Directory for authentication. So your Landmark applications, your Lawson Portal and Mingle will all have to be configured in there. And so if later on you down the road you add more Infor products, you're going to need to go in and add a relying party trust, because that creates the trust relationship between the web application and ADFS. So before you begin, like I said, you want to try to set yourself and your implementation partner up for success. So it's important, make sure that all your SSL certificates on all your applications are valid. And particularly with the ADFS certificate, the preferred format is PKCS 12. And either you'll want to export that certificate on ADFS with the public and private keys, or you'll want to give your implementation partner the ability to export that certificate with public and private keys, because they're going to need to use that file later in the implementation. You want to make sure that all your applications are using SSL, and that includes LBI, MSCM, anything that's going to have to connect to Lawson or to ADFS is going to need to be SSL. You want to get yourself and your users familiar with the user principal name at your organization, because that is what they're going to use to log in after ADFS is implemented. And then just as a general good idea, it's good to have a backup plan in case you do run into an issue maybe that didn't happen during your testing or wasn't tested, kind of thing. And the ADFS implementation is actually pretty straightforward to back out, just as long as you keep backups of everything. So back up your SSO config services, back up LDAP and your databases, and obviously server snapshots. But it's good to know that most of the actual configuration for ADFS occurs in LDAP, either LDAP or on the Landmark side, it occurs in the databases. So it is pretty simple to be able to come back from it. The specifications for all of your servers, and it's important to note that I'm not just talking about the ADFS servers. Once you implement ADFS, you're going to need all of your servers to be up to date, including your domain controller. And it does need to be Windows Server 2012. R2 is fine, but Infor is not prepared to support 2016 at this time. We've had a lot of clients ask us, and even ADFS, because you have to install IFS, which is an Infor product, on the same server as ADFS, your ADFS server also needs to be Windows Server 2012. We had a client recently who had their domain controller, I think was Windows 2008, and that would not work with the ADFS install. So it is very important to note that all of those need to be up to date, including where your Lawson applications are hosted. And then for your ADFS server, you want to give at least 12 gig of memory, 2 80 gig hard drives, and then you're going to install roles and features on that server. The application server role you're going to install, and you need to make sure, be very careful to select all of the components that go with the application server. So check all those boxes, make sure the whole thing gets installed. .NET 3.5 you're going to need, and then obviously you're going to install the ADFS role, and then your implementation partner can configure that, but it is a basic configuration, so if you choose to configure it yourself, that is fine as well. You're also going to require some SQL Server databases, and actually ADFS requires a database, but you can use the default Windows internal database, so you wouldn't have to stand up a separate SQL Server database for that. But you have the option of doing that if you want to have it on an external database. But IFS does require a SQL Server database. It has to be SQL Server, and it's similar to Mingle in that it creates its own database and doesn't give the installer the option of naming it. So typically, our clients typically want to host the IFS database on the same SQL server where they have Mingle, which is perfectly fine, but we ask that you create a separate named instance just for IFS on your SQL server, which doesn't affect your licensing. But that allows us to do the install without fear of the databases conflicting with what Mingle has put out there. So it's happened in the past where we've had conflicts and errors in the install, and it just works better if we have a separate named instance for the IFS databases. For the compatibility with your applications, I encourage you to review the compatibility matrix before you get started. As we know, that document changes frequently. You want to make sure that your landmark cumulative update right now, as of yesterday, is at least 10.11.16. Your environment level is 10.07 or greater. We've been bringing our clients up to 10.09. 10.09 is actually the last environment level that allows you to use LS as STS. So, and that's important to note too. And it's also important to note that Lawson Infor is starting to release patches that are only compatible with ADFS, and we're thinking that that may be the case for year-end patching as well. So please keep that in mind for year-end patching, because that's right around the corner. And if they only release year-end patches that are compatible with ADFS, then a lot of you might find yourselves in trouble there. So keep that in mind. And then your single sign-on applications, your LBI, all of those have minimum versions, LBI, MSCM, et cetera. And then typically what happens is you find that you need to go and update your LBI application, and you realize that it's on an old version of WebSphere. So it starts a kind of a snowball effect. You end up having to update WebSphere, Java, and then if you have to update your Lawson environment level, chances are you're going to need to update your distributed security package or DSP for your SSO applications to work. So just keep all of that in mind, prepare yourself for all of that. And then, again, I'm mentioning it again because it is so important, make sure that your Windows versions are compatible with the ADFS implementation. For the single sign-on applications, MSCM, LSO, LBI, those that use DSSO or DSP they have a little bit extra configuration involved with them. So for LBI and MSCM, they use a searching mechanism. They use an RMID to search, to check and make sure that users are allowed to access this application and what components they're allowed to access. And in order for it to work with this new ADFS implementation, the search user, it has to have their ID in Lawson Security matching their SSOP value. So typically what we do is we have clients add just one new service account to their Active Directory, and then we set up that service account in Lawson Security where their ID is user principal name, and then their SSOP identity is also user principal name. And then you'll have to go into your LBI and MSCM configuration and files and make those changes there to log in with the correct user. And other configurations that might change, anything that sort of accesses Lawson on the back end is going to slightly change. The credentials are going to change. You're going to have to use user principal name. For instance, the Lawson data connector for LBI, you would have to go in and supply the user principal name. So after your implementation, if you find that some of your applications just don't seem to be authenticating correctly or giving you errors when users try to connect, likely you are missing a user principal name somewhere or a port, which we'll discuss in just a second. So in IPA, if you have anything, and then this is kind of just what I described a second ago, where it's sort of connecting on the back end. So your file activity connections, your system command connections, if you have any of those nodes in your IPA processes, you're going to have to update your main configuration set to connect properly through what is called the fit client. So for this type of access, and also for your add-ins, Microsoft add-ins, the extra stuff that has like a client tool type login, Infor has us configure what is called a fit client, and it has a separate port. It has a unique port set up with it. So usually Infor asks that port be 1447 just to kind of maintain consistency. And then the user, it's still going to use user principal name. So you'll set up that fit client connection, and in all of your IPA to Lawson connections, you'll have to use the LSS. You know, you still have the web base URL, but you'll add the port to that, the fit client port, and then your user will be using user principal name. External web servers, like I mentioned, there's just a little bit extra work involved and extra servers, so keep that in mind too, because LS's STS sort of handles all of its authentication inside of Lawson in the background. Where what's different with ADFS is it's an actual full redirect to a new web page. So because you're redirecting to the ADFS server, if you have an external Lawson server, you also need to have an external ADFS server so that the clients won't get an error message whenever they try to go to the Lawson portal. Ideally, you'll have one internal ADFS server, one external ADFS server, and then your implementation partner can help you with creating the appropriate endpoints for your external server. And you want to make sure that your external server also has external certificate. We have most of our clients who use external web servers don't actually have a test external site, and we've been asking them to at least stand up a temporary test site, because this is kind of a new implementation that Infor is providing, and we want to test it. We want to make sure that it's well tested for each client. So just at least plan on having a temporary test site, a temporary ADFS test site, as well as a temporary external web server. The user identities that in Lawson Security and Landmark Security are going to change. So the SSOP identity in both is now going to have to use user principal name. So that will have to be updated for all users. And I'm mentioning all users in Lawson Security, but also all users in Landmark Security. If you have users who use their in-basket, you would have, for instance, you would have to go in and add a new identity for them that uses user principal name. And then there's a new identity that gets added, which I mentioned before, the fit client identity, and that, again, is going to be added in Lawson and in Landmark. So if you have power users who are using these extra tools, they need to have those identities assigned to them. And we have done this quickly and easily. We already have an IPA process written that gets Active Directory information and then loops through and updates the SSOP IDs and adds the fit client if it's needed. But you could also accomplish this using an SSO config file upload. But basically, I'm just saying you don't need to go through and manually do your users one by one, and we can help with doing it programmatically. So some basic tips in troubleshooting. I have found that, so Infor or Lawson has a 1 hour, I think it's the default session timeout. So, and you can set your ADFS session timeout, and I recommend synchronizing it because sometimes it doesn't behave quite right if it's not synchronized. If one or the other times out first, it makes it kind of difficult for the users to restart their session. And then the IFS user maintenance, like I mentioned, it's a new place where users have to be maintained, so it's kind of a bummer. But I have actually written a few articles on how to make it easier for you. So if you go to our website and look for our newsletters and articles, you'll see that I have a couple of IFS user maintenance articles about adding groups. You can use your Active Directory groups to synchronize your users. So anytime a user is added to a specific group, they will get added automatically into IFS. And at the same time, you can assign them the security roles that they may need in IFS, which there aren't that many, but you can do that. And then additionally, if you go into IFS, because it's a web page, if you go in there to maintain some users and you start getting some web errors, there's a chance that the IFS uses a lot of PowerShell commands, and that application server role install that we talked about earlier is what actually adds all of those PowerShell commands to your ADFS or IFS server. So you just want to make sure if you start getting a bunch of web errors, you want to go back into that server and make sure that all of the application server components did get installed. And then finally, just something to keep in mind, if you do create a new named instance of for your IFS database, you want to give it a static port, and you'll want to make sure that traffic is allowed over that port and your firewall rules. And the same thing for the thick client port for Landmark and LSS. It is a unique port, like I mentioned, and not commonly used, so you may need to make sure that that also is open in your firewall rules. So that that covers everything that I was going to cover with you guys today. And of course, this will be available for download, like Pam mentioned.
Yeah. So the other thing that we've got for you as a part of that download, so I'll send that link over to everybody as soon as it's available. But they'll also, at that link, there will be a Word document you can download with a questionnaire that you can complete and send to me if you'd like us to give you an idea of the size of your ADFS implementation. So we can prepare a proposal for you on that. I just wanted to quickly go over everything we covered today. So we basically covered the basics of ADFS, any of the prerequisites, the server types and server specs and whatnot. We covered compatibility. We covered impact on your other applications. And we covered some of the gotchas and some of the troubleshooting tips that Desi had. And we hope that those things will make you more prepared for your ADFS implementation, and that we hope that this was a big help to you. I see a few questions there on the left side of your screen. You'll see two tabs. The right one says chat. If you click there, then at the bottom you can type in any of the questions you might have. In the meantime, while those questions come in, I wanted to kind of post a little quick survey to see where you guys are with your ADFS planning and when you're planning to take it on. So you should see that survey, and I'll display the results as soon as it's done so everybody can see. We got at least one never. I figured there would be at least one never. Let's see. Let's see. Share voter percentage with attorney. All right. A lot of folks are not sure, it looks like. And for those of you who are not sure about it, the only thing that Desi mentioned that I wanted to kind of reiterate is, a lot of the times, especially if you're a payroll client, there'll be new cyclicals near the end of the year from BSI for payroll tax, obviously. And sometimes those cyclicals require an environment minimum level. And if there's a patch involved with that or whatever, and that patch is only for ADFS, then you're putting yourself at risk there. I would hope that Infor wouldn't do that, given how many clients still have not implemented ADFS. But then again, the cutoff date was March of this year, so I could kind of understand it. I'm going to go ahead and hopefully you can see the results. I'm not sure if you can or not, but looks like the majority of you are going to do this in the 4 to 6 month time frame. A lot of you are not sure, and at least one person is never going to do it. So with that, I'll turn over to questions. So Rick has a question. It says, are local Windows accounts still needed for user requiring file level access, i.e. access to print output directories. And he's got a second part to that question. I'm not sure if you know that, Desi. And then second part to that question, is a trust required with domains separate from the Lawson hosted environment? And then the third part of his question is the ADFS server the same as the main LSF server? That last one, I can tell you it is not. So that is, the ADFS server is a brand new machine that you'll stand up and just install ADFS and Infor Federations. I'm sorry, IFS on it. And so, but Desi, if you've got answers to those other two questions, I believe the first one, there's no change. We're really just changing the authentication layer, but you might have some additional feedback there.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. There's no change to how the access, once they get past ADFS, there's no change to how the access works. But I'm kind of confused about the local Windows. I didn't think you don't need local Windows accounts for specific users for print output directories. So maybe I'm not quite understanding that question. I mean, you would have a user group on your Lawson server, but you don't need individual Windows accounts for users on your Lawson server, typically. The trust with domains, I'll need to check on that. So you have domains separate from the Lawson hosted environment.
So Rick adds to that that local security is required to write to our file level in our environment.
Okay, I think that might be a unique situation.
That sounds like a unique situation that you have there. I'm not really sure why you need a local user on your servers. That seems like that is not a typical configuration, Rick. So we can, if you like, we can help you with that and help you figure that out. And then there's a couple of remarks about clients who are already in the Infor Cloud. So if you're already in the Infor Cloud, obviously you're already using ADFS. And I agree with Donald there that it is pretty great. I mean, ADFS is a better way of doing this. Okay, guys. So I know a lot of clients have come forward and say, look, I'm doing this big thing, and it is a sizable project. I won't lie. And there's a bit of risk involved. There's downtime involved. There's all this stuff, and they're saying, but my users are not getting anything out of it, right? Well, that's somewhat true, and I can sympathize with that. But at the same time, the ADFS is a better way of doing authentication versus leaving authorization to the application, because when you're leaving Lawson in charge of that, you've got inherent application layer risks. But ADFS is just a good place to do this. And it is a very well proven technology. And the other thing that it sets you up for is if you're an on-prem customer today, when you decide to finally move to the cloud, it'll be a lot simpler for you to do that move, because there won't be as much change to the organization. So, so Rick is asking if there is a way to do a list-based sync in ISS. Not that I know of. That's a good question. I can look into that, and I can. Actually, Dennis was asking that. Sorry, Dennis. I will look into that, and I don't think there is, but I will follow up with you. So let me take a note here. Dennis, list-based sync. Any other questions? Nothing at all. Okay, I got another one that says, I was wondering if ADFS did away with that. Oh, I'm sorry, that's just a comment. If you have any other questions, we can hang out for a few more seconds to kind of, I mean, I can hang out as long as you want, but if I don't see any more questions, we'll probably end it in a quick bit here. So Eric is saying we're on 10.00 MSB 7. Do we need to change the application version to do ADFS? I don't believe the application version is uh,
It's not impacted.
yeah, it's not impacted. It's not at odds with ADFS. It's your environment version that would be the one you're concerned with, and you want to be on 10.007 or higher of the environment. So the application itself is not relevant. But that's a good question. So Rick is asking, so if we are already compliant with our version, do we just need to add the ADFS server? Just to walk you through that process real quick, you essentially, obviously you want to start on your test servers first. So you're going to add this ADFS server. You're going to you're going to install some applications on there. And then there's a lot of configuration on the loss and end that you do. And then, any other ancillary or additional applications like LBI or MSCM or any of these things you might have. You set up your thick client, you change all your user stuff, and this all happens kind of most of the stuff happens over a weekend in your production, and then then you're fully implemented. We're talking about a few days worth of work overall. Any suggestions on dual factor authentication via ADFS? I know that our good friend Paul Mockenhoff has a solution on that. I'm not familiar with any other applications out there that offer dual factor authentication specific to Infor products. That is a specific to Infor product thing. And if you like, you can send me an email. I can put you in touch. But realistically, once you use ADFS, there's a host of dual factor authentication that you can applications you can implement. But the one I mentioned is built specifically for Infor applications and other applications as well, but it was built with Infor stuff in mind. So Eric is asking, hardware-wise, we could install ADFS and IFS on a new server and have the SQL DB on the Mingle server. I believe that's correct, right, Desi?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's how most clients are doing it. Yes.
Yes. And we've had this question a lot, Eric, about not exactly the question you asked, but the question of can we just install this ADFS thing on another one of the servers we already have? Or a lot of customers ask, well, we are already using ADFS within our organization and we have an ADFS server already for other things. Can we just use that? Our recommendation is no. Our recommendation is to stand up a new server because we've seen a lot of these variations. Um, this stuff isn't exactly well documented, and it isn't. It's not quite that easy to walk around. So we know of a surefire way to make it work, and it works well after you get it to work. So we've got a lot of customers that have been live on it with zero problems ever since. And the way we've done that is with this additional server. We've never tried it any other way with having it installed on some other machine, and we don't know of anybody else who actually has done that successfully. But and Joseph is, I believe, kind of saying exactly what I went with here. We're already on ADFS on-prem as a business security migration method, have PowerShell disabled on many systems, making ADFS management a bit cumbersome at times. Have other clients been faced with this scenario, and how have they dealt with it? So actually, different question, good question. Desi, have you seen any customers that want to limit PowerShell, and have they figured out a way there?
No, I have not seen that. I don't even know how how it would work because there's so
Yeah,
many PowerShell commands are utilized in this process.
yeah, that is a tough one, Joseph. I definitely recommend figuring out an answer to that before moving on. But you guys are already on ADFS, so I don't. There must be some things that you can do and some things that you can't. I'm not sure. Um, yeah. Rick is asking, can we use one IFS server for multiple sites? Does he?
I I just don't think I'm not sure that you could, but I don't think I would recommend it
I'm
anyway.
I'm a little confused what you mean by sites, actually, Rick. Do you mean by like different environments, or what's your um oh you have multiple tenants on, yeah, so you have a multi-tenant. Well, with a multi-tenant system, ADFS, I believe, would just work because you're using the the full name essentially of the user. I don't think you'd have an issue there, which is using that one IFS server, but I'd have to kind of dig a little deeper into exactly how you're doing it. There's the devil's always in the details with this thing, so hard to say, but I think you can. Uh, I see. And you want to split them. Yeah, that sounds like a deeper discussion. I don't, yeah, you can certainly split them. Yeah, feel free to contact me. You can reach me and Desi, by the way, with our first name. So Desi is just DESI at Nogalis.com. I'm just Tan at Nogalis.com. Tan like the color, Tan, TAN at Nogalis.com. Or you can always go to Nogalis.com/contact, or, good old fashioned pick up the phone and call us anytime. We're happy to talk to you about, your ADFS or any other Lawson or development related thing you've got going on. We're happy to be a resource. Um, so Joseph is asking, has anyone run into thumbprint expiration when communication between ADFS and WAP server stops working, and how have you dealt with this? This renders ADFS unusable. Um, does this have to do with that expiration timeout thing, or not sure?
I don't think so. The
I
WAP,
don't think,
meaning wireless access points, I don't.
no, I think he's talking about remember the WAP solution for that external facing thing that we were discussing a few
Oh,
weeks
that
ago.
thing.
Yeah,
Oh.
I forget what this WAP stands for. Um,
Mm.
don't quite remember, but Joseph, we haven't run into that. Hope, wish I could help. Eh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's right. It's the proxy server. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Web
Yeah,
application
too
proxy
many
server.
acronyms.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks for that. It was going to drive me crazy. Yeah, and in fact, that becomes somewhat required. Like if you have an external facing web server, like if you're running ESS, MSS externally, like in your DMZ, that's using the web application proxy server is a way to get around that. And we haven't run into certificate issues that I know of. Um, I'd be curious to see what they are. Um, And then Eric is asking, our Active Directory does only cover our corporate office and remote sites don't have AD. Can we still use something like MS Atom or ADLS?
I mean, that's something that would have to be configured in ADFS, so Microsoft might have an answer to that.
Yeah, you guys have some hard questions, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that either, but I mean, I'm going to write that one down too, Eric, and I will get back to you. Just copy and paste that over here.
Well, I just wonder if you could somehow finagle the thick client to work for those users.
Yeah, so those of you who've been with us the whole call, you probably heard the word thick client used a few times. That's so your users are going to start using this ADFS way of accessing the server, but there is still this thing called the thick client, which is this kind of uh, a solution that Infor has in place for other applications like add-ins and things like that to still be able to connect. So it's possible, like Desi said, that there's a way through thick client, but I will send this out to a few folks who may have some opinions on that for you, and I will get back to you if I get a good answer for you. All right, it looks like the questions are winding down. Thank you guys again for joining. We will do a recording of this. Will be available soon. I will send out an email with the link to it, and also the link to this questionnaire that I talked about earlier. If you're interested in receiving a proposal for your ADFS implementation, please fill out that questionnaire and reply back to the email, or just send an email to tan@nogalis.com, and I'm happy to do that for you. And like I said, if you have other questions, feel free to always contact us. We're available. So thanks again for joining, and have a great rest of your day.